Good morning and welcome to this week's Grow, where we gather to recharge, organize, and work here as members of MWEG. We're glad that you're joining us today. We are going to be talking about immigration and what it means for all of us, about lightening the load together. And I'm just going to go ahead and introduce our guests that we have today. We have Kristen Daly, who is the executive director of Their Story is Our Story, a nonprofit that works to collect and share the experiences of refugees to encourage understanding and empathy and advance public policy. She's also a practicing attorney at Scale LLP, chairing the corporate transactions group. So Kristen has been aligned with MWEG, and we've worked with her for a while, and she began representing asylum seekers in 2016, which predates us, and she works with multiple organizations to support people who have been forcibly displaced from their homes. Kristen is grateful for her home in the Seattle area, which she shares with her husband, children, and their dog, which they acquired during the pandemic. And then we also have Nori Gomez de Baibi, who is an advocate for immigrant communities with a background in sociology, immigration, and civil rights. In 2023, she graduated from Brigham Young University and also co-organized Utah with All Immigrants, which is a community advocacy group dedicated to fostering solidarity and support for immigrants and refugees across the state of Utah. Since graduating, she's also worked in immigration law and for the state of Utah, and she gained firsthand experience in policy and legal frameworks affecting immigrants and other vulnerable communities. After initially coming to know and love MWEG as a student intern and volunteer on our Shoulder to Shoulder, which is now just our immigration advocacy group, Nori works with the immigrant community coordinator, or as the immigrant community coordinator for MWEG, to help members come together to learn how they can better love and uplift their immigrant and refugee neighbors. This fall, Nori will begin pursuing a master's of theological studies at Emory University, Candler School of Theology in Atlanta, Georgia. So that will bring deep empathy to her work, and shaped by her own experiences as a former undocumented immigrant and now a naturalized U.S. citizen. So we are so grateful for their lived experience and their professional experience that they are bringing to us today. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to them for this discussion. And if you have comments or questions, we would encourage you to leave those in the chat, or if you want, you can unmute and ask your question. But go ahead. So turn the time over to you guys.
Hey, thank you so much. And Kristen, thank you for being with us today. I've set a timer because we've chatted before and we can always chat for a long time. So I'm trying to make sure that we keep on task today to be able to talk about immigration and refugees and how each of us can be doing more with our simple tools and our unique abilities. So I'm so excited to be able to have you here with us, Kristen. Thank you.
Looking forward to it. I always look forward to our conversations.
All right, let's go ahead and dive in, and hopefully today we'll be able to go over some questions, and then also be able to have a little bit of a time for Q&A with those who are joining us here with us live. So let's go ahead and get started with our first question, which is for you, Kristen. I know that we introduced a little bit about what Their Story is Our Story is, and but I want to learn a little bit more about how you specifically got involved with the organization.
Absolutely. Rachel did a pretty good introduction, but let me give you a little bit about our origin story. So this organization began before I was involved in it, around 2015, 2016. And if the name sounds familiar to people listening on this call, Their Story is Our Story, it is a nod to Elder Kieran. He talked about this and what if their story was our story? And he said it is. But what we do is, as Rachel said, we collect and share experiences of refugees and their allies to encourage empathy and understanding and advance public policy and really to educate, advocate, and integrate. We have had to do a bit of a pivot recently because now what we're doing is stressing how detention and mass deportation are tearing us apart, that there is no them. These policies impact us, they impact our friends, our neighbors, our families, our communities. And really bringing that home has been, a little bit heartbreaking, but really important work. TSOS started, like I said, about 10 years ago, and it was actually started by a group of American expats who were living in Germany when Angela Merkel said, we'll take 1 million Syrian refugees, and everybody else, was saying not on our shores. And that was a really pivotal moment. If you think about when Kabul fell, we took in about 82,000 Afghans, people we had promised to take. And we are 4 times the size, both in population and area, of Germany. And we acted like, the sky was falling, that was such an impossible task. They did 1 million over the course of 2 years. So it was all hands on deck. And you had these women who were US born and were citizens of this country, but they were over there with their families, and they were working in their schools and their communities because it was all hands on deck. And when they would come home, the 2016 election was changing our national dialogue on immigration. And so people would say, Germany's making a really terrible mistake. And they're going to regret this. And so they would do what came naturally. They would get out their phones and show a picture and say, should I, let me tell you about this family I'm working with, and or this young man, and they tell their stories, and they would see, this was not an organized effort, that this was just their experience, and they would see people do a 180 in their opinion in the course of a 5-minute conversation when you were bringing this back to real people. So that was the genesis for the idea. It was started by a group of artists and videographers, photographers, writers. I am none of those. I'm an attorney. So maybe I'm odd man out in here, but it was people who had this really artistic vision for how do we share these stories. I came into TSOS about the end of 2019. And I had already started working with refugees in 2016, specifically asylum seekers. And I did that because of what I saw going on the national stage. I am not an immigration attorney. I'm a corporate attorney, really boring in that kind of sense. But I have a license that allows me to work with other nonprofits and to learn to do some of these things. So I started representing asylum seekers. And that really changed my life in a lot of ways, all for good, I would say. But in 2019, that summer, I was feeling kind of this divine discontent, if you will, that I needed to do more. And I had been introduced over Facebook to a book that TSOS had put out called Let Me Tell You My Story. I bought it. I thought it would be great for my children who were younger then to see why I did what I did during my free time. And that summer, when I was feeling like I should do more, I thought, I wonder about this group, but I don't know anything about them, and I don't know anybody who works for them. So I just kind of put it out in prayer. I put it to the universe. I put it to God. And I said, if this is something I should do, provide a way. And a few months later, I answered an email or a social media post, probably that came through MWAG, a member of MWAG, who was asking if people in the Seattle area could help with childcare during an English language class. And I said, I can do that a couple of days a week or a month. And so the woman who was running that came to my house, and we had a long meeting about it. And at the end, she said, oh, by the way, I also work with this group called TSOS. So that was my entry. And a couple months later, I had a whole bunch of people from TSOS that I'd never met staying at my house to do story collection in the Seattle area. Anyway, it has snowballed from there.
I know you and I have had the chance to talk so many times, but you've never actually told me that timeline. And it's interesting to me listening to you tell that story, because at the same time, 2017, 2019, obviously there was so much going on at a national stage. As a parallel for me personally, in 2017, I was coming home from my mission. In 2018, I was starting to get into my college classes. And in 2019 was when I also started kind of grappling with a lot of these things. I felt really hurt and disappointed by so many of the things going on the national stage. I felt really powerless as well, as someone who wasn't a citizen, someone who couldn't vote, someone who speaking out and telling their story. I was putting myself in danger by doing that, but I also felt like I had no choice. Like I had to start getting people to understand my perspective and how some of these policies were impacting me and my family's well-being and my immigrant community, for them to actually start to feel empathy that I continued to see was lacking on so many levels. So it's interesting to me to see, you know, in separate states, completely different timelines in our own journeys, but that we were also, you know, around the same kind of points in time, figuring out these things, how to get more involved, how to start telling these stories, how to use the skills and talents that we have to be able to engage with this topic better, and to bring compassion into this narrative. So thank you for telling us that story and kind of your beginnings with TSOS to now, right? It's been 5 years since you've been doing this work.
Well, more actually at this point. So yeah, but yes.
Well, with that, with so many of these stories that you have the opportunity to both hear and share, can you tell us about a story that has had a profound impact on you?
You know, we talked about this question, and I actually come back and say can't think of one that hasn't had a profound impact on me. Now, probably the first one was the most jarring, and that was my first asylum case. It was a young woman with 2 little girls who came over from Afghanistan, and her story is on our website. Actually, it's my blog. It's because it's anonymous, talking about my first asylum case. But I came away from that realizing that so few of us really know what true terror and fear is. And maybe we're learning a little bit right now, but how difficult living with that is all the time. And that changed my perspective and made me know I had to do my little bit to do more. You know, in terms of stories that had a really profound impact on me recently, we went to Bowling Green, Kentucky last March, I think. And I've been there a few times. I love Bowling Green, Kentucky. Can you believe it? But that is the place where there are more refugees per capita than any other community in the United States. And I mean, they have them from everywhere. I was there the first time, and I was like, how did the Cubans find Bowling Green, Kentucky? But they started taking in Bosnian refugees in the early 1990s. And this is a place where they recognize that this has changed the trajectory of their town, and that their own vitality and success is tied to bringing in these people who have this energy and this passion for creating community. And so what I love about Bowling Green is the churches, the universities, the schools, the city, the businesses, they all work together. There's no little fiefdoms. It's like, well, how can we make this happen? How can we solve this problem? And one particular couple there, they run a group called Refuge Bowling Green, and he's from Burkina Faso. She's from Kentucky. They're married. They met while she was serving a mission in the Burkina Faso area with her church. And they have literally made decision after decision after decision to be of service. And they started by just creating a soccer team for children, refugee children in the area, to have a place to be, to have role models and things. And then they chose to give up their home and to move into the apartment complex where all of these refugees were being resettled, and just open their door and their refrigerator. And I listened to all the things they've done, and now they've built this huge organization that serves healthcare and employment and English classes and all of these things. Transportation issues in the Midwest are a huge issue. And as they shared their story, she just said, I don't want to get to the end of my life and wonder, was I really of use? And we sat in that story, the videographer, the photographer, the other interviewer, and me, after they got done. And there was just this powerful feeling that nobody wanted to move. Nobody wanted to break that spell. Not just about who they are and the people they serve, but really the divine plan in this. And so that one touched me greatly.
I love that so much. And I feel like you're bringing in something that's so important to MWEG, which is obviously our foundation that is completely rooted in our faith, right? Everything that we do, all of our pillars, our entire mission statement as an organization is rooted in these beliefs that we have hope for a better world, in honoring the humanity and the dignity of every person. And that bleeds into all of our different pillars of advocacy with all that we do. with that being said, with bringing in this faith aspect to it, how do you believe that your engagement in this work, with all of us really in our different areas of focus, right? Not just through immigration or refugee policy, but also with other policy areas, how, there is this common belief that translates, whether it's through, a mission for someone else. This woman that you're sharing went on a mission for her church through Burkina Faso. There's this belief that we as humans on earth right now have the ability to be God's hands and feet and eyes. And how do you think, for you personally, how has this belief shaped your perspective when it comes to service and advocacy?
I'd love to talk about that. I mean, that it's both humbling and ennobling to know that the Lord is willing to use us, as imperfect as we are, to do his work. I think about this all the time. And if we sometimes we talk about, doing things with an eye single to his glory. Well, what is his glory? He says it himself, is my work and my glory is to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of man in Moses 139. His work and his glory is his children. So if we're to do things with an eye single to his glory, I believe it is to care for his children. Probably for my own mental health, I've been doing this scripture study in the morning about how do we live in a society where our institutions and maybe our morals are crumbling around us, our traditions. And I am absolutely convinced that this is God's work. This is what he wants us to do. It isn't, if I read in Alma or I read in Helaman, where civilization is falling apart, it talks about how they did impart of their substance, every man according to what he had. They did not send away anyone who were naked or they were hungry or they were thirst. They were liberal unto all. Both old, young, both bond free, both male and female. And then I look at how Christ started his mission, how he announced his mission in the synagogue. He quoted Isaiah saying that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he's anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He hath sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised. That's how he began his mission. And he ended it by giving us Matthew 25, which says, for I was hungered and you gave me meat. I was thirsty and you gave me drink, a stranger and you took me in. By the way, that definition of stranger is refugee, translated. Naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came unto me. I've spoken about some of these things at Education Week at BYU, and especially for members of our faith. I think it's really important to realize that the Book of Mormon is a book about displaced peoples, not just one, but over and over and over. It's a book about displaced people and how they are received or not. President Nelson, in just this last conference talk, said the great opportunity before us is to become the people God needs us to be. And so maybe that's my biggest desire right now in this work. How do I approach service? How do I become the person that God needs me to be?
Wow, thank you so much for that, and for citing scriptures. I'm always so excited whenever we can bring the scriptures into this. I mean, that's why I'm going to theology school, right? Is to be able to study advocacy through this lens of the gospel, because it just sets my soul on fire. And I know that we feel it so much. I mean, that's why so many members of our faith and of so many different faiths are inspired to serve missions, to go and teach, to share God's love in these unique ways by uplifting and by helping his children all throughout the earth. A couple of weeks ago, MWAG had the opportunity here in Utah to be able to co-organize a vigil. And it was an interfaith vigil with a lot of other Christian denominations. We had a Muslim imam there. We had someone representing the Jewish faith. And it was such a beautiful gathering where we were able to talk about immigrants and refugees through this lens, and bring scriptures from different holy texts as well to kind of support all of us in saying, we want to do more and we will not shy away from this difficult topic at this time. And while I was preparing the remarks that I was sharing on behalf of MWEG, I really wanted to say something, and I ended up saying that just because I see all the different messages that we get from women who are newly joining MWEG Central, who, you know, are joining the immigration and refugee space and who are wanting to learn more, but don't always know how to do so because they've been maybe scared to have really difficult conversations on the topic with their family, especially in an environment that is so heavily polarized now. And it takes real courage to be able to try and dive into these conversations and to see something so complicated through what I define as kind of a divine lens, right? To try and take out all the fluff and the noise that the world puts into these issues on immigration and refugee policies, and try to see it from the eyes of a God, of, you know, a heavenly Father who is moving and guiding his children to where he needs them to be on this journey. And something that I said in those remarks was, you know, we might be scared to engage with politics, but if we look at politics as policies that impact people and remember that people matter greatly to God, then it helps to remind us that in engaging in politics, in these conversations, in advocacy of this sense, it is also a way for us to be able to honor our God, to love him by loving his children, by loving one another. And I know that there might be a lot of people who still feel that way, who feel really overwhelmed in trying to do this work and feeling like perhaps they missed the window to get engaged. And, you know, what would you say to someone who feels like maybe they're showing up too late in engaging on this issue?
You aren't. That's what I'd say immediately. There are so many opportunities. It may be that, you know, the United States is not taking in refugees right now, which breaks my heart. I won't be, I won't be blunt about that. But there still are some people coming in, medical visas, family reunification. Some of that is still happening in dribs and drabs. But we have a number of people here who need help. Resettlement agencies have lost funding. They've had to reduce their staffs. They are desperate for help. There's all kinds of volunteer opportunities, mentoring, teaching English classes. One that I got involved in right at the end of January was rental payments. Because when they shut off the federal funds, suddenly we had people who were supposed to have 3 months of housing when they get here. And remember, I mean, you're supposed to pick up your lives and be able to, you know, run with the ball after 3 months. It's pretty crazy that we expect that, but you're at least supposed to have 3 months of help. But the resettlement agencies suddenly couldn't, and that was deliberate. They wanted that to fail. So I called IRC. I'm in the Seattle area. And I said, tell me how many individuals have come in the last 90 days and how many families you need help with rent for. And I started making sure that those rent payments were covered with help from other community members, organizations, foundations. And do you know what? That filled my soul more than maybe it did IRC's, because they were so astounded that somebody would call them and just ask proactively. They said, we felt so alone. We're not allowed to talk to the press. We can't do anything. We have felt completely isolated, that nobody cared. And their gratitude just, I cannot tell you what it did for me in that moment. I had a sister, I have a sister, sorry, in the Colorado area, and she has younger children, and she has wondered, you know, I want to do more, but I have to remind her there's a time and a season. But when she was really struggling too, I said, hey, call your resettlement agency, do this, see what it does for you. She will tell you that was one of the most amazing things that she did. She was able to also do the same thing in her community, just on the rental payments. And yes, sometimes we want to do something more than write a check, but when you know your check is going to something really tangible that's helping this family of 6, where the father is ill, and can't work, there's something really meaningful in that. She's now working with a family in her ward from Haiti to help them get their legal papers in order. There is lots of opportunities, and I am happy to always find ways to connect you. I just saw a map yesterday of all of these just arrows that you can go to for what are the organizations in your area that need help. But they definitely need help. So maybe this is the best time of all to get involved.
Yeah, I definitely agree that I think right now is such a crucial moment with funding being cut on all ends, right? And recently, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, when all of the funding was cut for the refugee resettlement programs. A local organization here in Utah, and they have, different hubs in other states, but the Catholic Community Services here in Utah lost all of their funding. And, they went from a staff of almost 24 different attorneys and paralegals that were helping with this refugee resettlement, and then having to lay off a ton of people until finally they made the choice to absolutely shut it down after over 2 decades of being involved in refugee resettlement here in Utah, and providing that support to incoming refugees. And just about a week after they announced that they had to shut down the refugee resettlement program at CCS, they made an announcement on their LinkedIn and on their Instagram that because of community donations, they were able to gather over $1 million of funding to help them carry them through for the next few months, and so that they could provide those same services. And I thought about that, and I was like, wow, how many people pitched into that to be able to garner that support? And perhaps they had some donors that gave a big amount, but perhaps there were some people in the community that gave just $5, $10, $20 of what they had available, that then amassed to this big impact that helps this organization to be able to continue running. So as much as I agree that on a national stage there's so much that is concerning. I see it every day in the messages from different MWAG women that are joining right now, because they're just like, I am now feeling so compelled to do more than I was doing last year or in the last 5 years. And there are just so many ways that we are needed right now, expressly because of everything that we see, with funding being cut, with people being laid off, with entire organizations being shut down, and individuals having to find other ways to help. And so that's how right now, with our hands as members within our communities, we are able to see that work and engage in it in a unique way that can be life-saving for so many people.
Well, I mean, you asked me a question earlier about, the best medicine can be to serve, and how does that help us process, heal, and fight back against despair? And I would just note, for me personally, my mental health toolkit, which we all need right now, by the way, it includes a couple things. Like, I try to get outside. I really appreciate my pandemic dog right now. I think dogs are great mental health. But I also every morning try to think, what is one tangible thing I can do today? Sometimes it's smaller, sometimes it's larger. But there was a particular week where I was feeling just really heavy and really hopeless with the news cycle. And IRC, because I am now on their strategy committee from that phone call, and I also am kind of their emergency person when they don't have funding and some new need that they didn't anticipate comes in. I have a network that helped resettle Afghan refugees when Kabul fell, and I can kind of gather that up. But they called and they said, we have a Palestinian family, which was a shock because nobody gets out of there. We had a Palestinian family, and they said, we need help. We've got to get them a home. He's got pancreatic cancer. They have 3 children. Anyway, for 4 days, there were all these moving pieces. I was gathering friends. We were driving 45 minutes. We were helping set up an apartment. We were meeting them. We were going back and forth, filling gaps, buying groceries, all of these things. And at the end of those 4 days, I realized I hadn't had time to obsess about the news once. And I needed that break. I needed to do something tangible. They are great friends of ours now. And, I'll stay involved with that family, but they were more of a blessing perhaps for me that week when I needed the spiritual uplift than perhaps I was to them.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. It's so incredible that service in that way can be, kind of the symbiotic relationship where we go into it thinking that we have, tools or resources that we can offer and that we can be of support. And then we always end up feeling that way, right? That God doesn't let us forget that in addition to our help being so necessary, that we needed that instance of service as well. That it can be a healing balm to us as well, even where, someone else might see it as, giving of our time. losing time in your calendar of your resources, whatever it may be that you lose out on because of deciding to do this. But it's not that at all. There's so much more that we gain in being able to get involved, even in these small, simple ways, right? I've had friends reach out to me that have asked, in response to so much happening, what can I do? And I've even told them, just contact your local Spanish branch, contact your stake president and ask them, is there a ward right now that is maybe struggling with some of these things in which I can support? Ask the Relief Society president, is there a family right now that might be scared to go to the grocery store and I can help and deliver those goods? Are there parents right now that are scared to drive their kids to school? Can I start a carpool for them? And there's so many small ways that we can all do that work, and that God is hoping that we'll do it, to show truly that we love our neighbors and that we're willing to stand in solidarity with them, even if we might not understand all the reasons why they are suffering or understand the fallout of so many of these complicated and decades-long policies that are being changed right now, but that we have this opportunity to really make a difference.
Nori, that's a really good point too. I just want to say, as an attorney in this system, nothing captures it, how difficult it is and how complicated it is. And so, and until you're in it, I used to not ascribe ill will to our politicians because I knew they just didn't understand the process. Now I know there's a narrative that they really want to push. So some of it's ignorance and some of it is willful. But learn about it. Learn about it and talk about some of the things that are of concern to you. We have a lot of instances where I can talk to people about real things happening and lights go on in their eyes because they've heard things on the news, but it's when they hear how it's impacting people right here in their own community that they didn't realize, they didn't know it was happening right around them, that somebody's been arrested right outside our library last week, and that this group is helping families with family safety plans so that their U.S. citizen children don't go into foster care if they are detained. There are a lot of simple ways, but honestly, one of the best ways you can do is just to have these conversations with your friends and families about real things, because those are more powerful and will stick with people than the headlines, the stereotypes, the blatant lies, if you talk about what you know.
Well, I know that we could talk for hours more. We have already in preparation for this, but I want to make sure that we also give time to anyone who's here who might have a specific question that Kristen can provide some insights on, or that we can help with as MWAG as well. We're just, immigration and refugee support and advocacy has been a pillar of MWAG from its very inception. And we're seeing so many women who are joining right now for this policy issue specifically. And the immigration space in Central is growing. So I want to make sure that we provide this time for anyone who might have a specific question that we can address before wrapping up.
Nori, if there's not a specific question, I'd still love to address one thing that you and I talked about.
Absolutely. Guess we'll continue to monitor the chat, but take it away, Kristen.
You and I have a similar hero, Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative. Okay, and he talks about the idea of being stone catchers, people who stand in that gap to absorb the weight of others' pains. And what does that mean? President Nelson, in his talk on being peacemakers, which is something we discuss a lot at MWAG, talks about how charity propels us to bear one another's burdens rather than heap burdens on one another. And Melissa Inouye, who, she wrote this amazing book, Sacred Struggle. She's spoken at MWAG. She was such a warrior for social justice and for caring for those on the margins. And she said, Jesus calls us to work alongside him. He called us to follow him by being the best person we can be for others in relationship with others very different from us, and joining in his sacred work of shouldering their burdens. I had a personal experience this very weekend that I wanted to share because we're seeing these examples, some of your viewers may have seen, the ICE raids that are happening. And some of them are just absolutely horrific. There was a real member from ICE testifying on the Hill this week talking about how they're being prevented from working on cases that they were doing before on human trafficking so they can go after landscapers now. And we see this. We see this targeting of people who are in our communities, contributing to our communities. Some of those raids were in Massachusetts, and I had a dear friend here over the weekend. She has 3 Nigerian daughters. That's a long story, but she has 3 daughters from Nigeria, all of whom are here on student visas doing graduate work, and they've been with her through undergrad and stuff. But one of them and her husband had taken a trip to Martha's Vineyard. They were invited to go there last week. They've suffered some real personal tragedies this year, and a kind family wanted to have them to have a break and just a time to reset and recharge. And it was, they had a wonderful week, and they were supposed to leave the island last Thursday. That Thursday morning, my dear friend got a text from one of her friends at Martha's Vineyard saying, we just got credible reports that ICE is going to do raids starting in the next few days. So we scrambled and we thought, okay, maybe it's in the next few days, and today's the best day for them to get off the island. But then we heard, no, it's today. That Martha's Vineyard community rallied. All the people that knew about them rallied. First off, they notified and let them know that there was danger. Then they volunteered to go to the ferry terminal with them to make sure that they weren't alone when they went. There's only one way on and off that island. Then when they realized, no, the raids have started today, they extended their stay. They made sure they were safe. They brought them groceries so they didn't have to go out. And they waited for about 2 days until the coast was clear on Saturday, and then accompanied them to the ferry terminal again so they could get home safely to Cambridge, Massachusetts. I just want to point that out because that's one of the ways we take care of each other, is by staying aware and looking after those who might be impacted. Sometimes we feel really helpless, but I thought it was just a beautiful example of how one community said, we're going to take care of this family and make sure they're not in the crosshairs.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I've seen examples like that recently too, of people who are starting to come together in new ways that perhaps they didn't before. Proximity to individuals that are experiencing the impact of these different policy changes, policy implementations. It's changing people's hearts. In my last year at BYU, I did a research project on miracles that people experience through their journey to coming to the United States. And so I interviewed a number of different people of varying different statuses. And I turned in my research to the Wheatley Institute. It was part of a scholarship that I received for BYU. And I was kind of scared to turn it in a little bit because my conclusion with my research was probably a little bit challenging, I think, because it was trying to explore a little bit more, how man's laws on immigration impact humanity and how they impact God's plan for his children. And I was really scared because I was just like, okay, some people who are reviewing my research might see this as a little bit problematic, but it was the testimony that I had gained after interviewing these different individuals. And a few months ago, I received an email from the woman who was my advisor during that research project. And she said that in her ward right now, there is a family whose temporary protected status was canceled and who has been deeply impacted by everything that's happening right now. And they're in an English ward. This is a Spanish-speaking family from Latin America. And because of that proximity that this ward has had to this one family, it has caused their hearts to soften, some gears to turn in seeing that very real impact to people that they love, to people that perhaps before January, they had no idea was going through this immigration journey here in the United States, and who is now, through that proximity, starting to feel a little bit more strongly about this issue and starting to bring in that humanity a little bit more. And she told me this story. She just said, I can't get your research out of my head every time that I talk to this family, because even though I was so scared to turn in that research, her reading that research started to kind of plant that seed of how can I foster that proximity? How can I look at this really complicated issue in a different way? And now 2 years later, she is having this instance of really being able to see it in action. And I just want to finish out this with a closing thought. You brought up Brian Stevenson, our hero. We love him. He has this quote about being stone catchers. But I remember in the 2021 General Conference, I think it was April, that Elder Renland quoted him in an entire talk about infuriating unfairness and how we can be stone catchers. So for anyone, who's here right now or who will watch this recording later, I would encourage you to go read that talk from Elder Renland to try and dissect how it applies to us right now. That was a talk given 4 years ago that I think is so relevant to everything that we're experiencing right now, that can perhaps give us some insights on how we can be those stone catchers every day in our lives, whether it's in trying to disarm some of these really dehumanizing narratives that we're seeing going around when it comes to immigrants and refugees, or if it's trying to find ways that we can help be the bridge and be the solution in our own communities, in all the ways, big or small, that we can really make a difference and be God's hands at this time when each and every one of us is so needed.
Nora, when I started my work, back in 2016, so almost 10 years ago, with asylum seekers, I realized at that point I could never guarantee the outcome of any one case, but I could make sure that individual didn't walk that path alone. This is a really frightening time. And we can be those people, even if we can't solve everything, we can make sure they're not going through it alone. And that's powerful. So, and I'll just throw out there, if anybody's interested in more of what TSOS is doing, we are always looking, not just for volunteers, but people who want to come and learn how to do these interviews and join us on our storytelling trips. So they're powerful too. Talk about a way to bring proximity in your life.
Hi, could I say something? Sorry, I'm not able to figure out how to use the chat on my app, so I'm just using my video.
Yeah, go ahead, Crystal. Crystal, if you're talking, you're muted again, so we can't hear you if you're still there.
Okay, can you hear me now? Sorry. I was a refugee resettlement case manager until recently, up in northern Utah, and well, I did that for a little bit, and then designed some volunteer programs. And one of the things I just wanted to add to this really wonderful discussion is the importance of donations. With the closure of the resettlement and placement program, which is overseen by the State Department, within days of limiting refugees from coming to the country, one of the things that happened is that case managers were limited to what are called core services. So they were only allowed to do very limited case management work. And we know that refugees that recently come, there's a lot of needs. And so one of the things that's really important is what's called unrestricted funds. And that's community donations, because those funds aren't attached to stipulations through contracts or through grants. And so it allows these agencies to kind of get creative in problem solving when there are certain stipulations put on them, like what happened right around the inauguration, so they could still pay their staff to help perform work that the contracts that they were under were becoming more restrictive on. That was one thing. Another thing is some of the top needs right now are employment. So there's opportunities. If in your area, you can look to help refugees find employment. It's going to become even more critical as there are budget issues. They're passing bills and things where they're going to start restricting like Medicaid and other services that refugees are supposed to be allowed to have for up to a year. And so getting employed, getting on insurance, those are going to become more critical in the coming years. In addition to that, any kind
Crystal, I think you're muted again. So sorry.
sorry. There's other ways to get involved, but legal, there's a lot of strain on immigration attorneys as well, with so many trying to get asylum status if they're what's called their temporary protected status has been cut off. And so there's ways to volunteer in that capacity as well. Not necessarily doing immigration law, but doing some assisting. So I just wanted to share that. I really appreciate what MWIG is doing and that I get to be a part of it now. But thank you.
Well, thank you, Crystal. Yeah, for that plug. And you're totally correct. Those are so many more ways that each of us can be of support. You know, even if time or is a restriction, being able to donate and provide to those funds of the different organizations is so crucial to them being able to continue their work. And they're already so many incredible ways to be able to get involved if we just start to reach out to our local organizations and ask how we can be of service. And sure, so many different organizations are just praying that willing and excited volunteers will reach out to be able to provide their support in any capacity that they can. So thank you for that reminder. And I think with that, we'll turn the time back over to close out today's Grow.
Nori and Kristen, thank you so much for this information and for sharing these stories with us. It's always a great way to remind us to stay involved and stay aware of what's happening within our communities and the ways that we can serve. I would also just put a plug that sometimes if you look on justserve.org, you can see within, because that's community based by where you live, that you can see ways to help a refugee resettlement, things that are happening right near you. So if you are unfamiliar with that, that is connected with the church, but it's community based. So any organizations within the community can submit for volunteers. So if you can, that's just one more way. And I put a couple different links in the chat to Their Story is Our Story. I put the link to that talk, couple other ones, and I will put those in MWAG Central under the video link in the Grow video so that you can go back and get those. But thanks for sharing this with us. Thanks to everybody that was here, and we hope that you'll come back and join us next week for our Grow. Until then, we'll see you later.